The child never blinked, not once. As the coffin lowered into the earth, his eyes stayed locked on the hole in the ground like he could still see her, moving. And then he smiled. In 1867, in the rural sprawl of Sedalia, Missouri, a boy emerged from the fog of America's post-war trauma, a boy untouched by human rhythms. 8-year-old Timothy Caldwell, orphaned by death, raised by silence, catalogued by fear, became the centerpiece of a buried history that modern medicine has all but erased. What began as whispered unease among neighbors became a sealed record, hidden in archives that officials claimed never existed. 3 deaths, dozens of animals mutilated with surgical precision, eyes that studied suffering like a scientist studies cells. Timothy Caldwell was not like other children, not broken, not sick, but constructed differently. His presence was not felt, it was observed, and the question no one dared voice aloud lingers like the echo of a scream. What was he really? Dr. Samuel Harding, one of the few classically trained physicians in Missouri's frontier, kept 3 journals on the boy, journals he never published, journals filled with sketches, anatomy diagrams, and chilling observations that blurred the line between clinical science and spiritual dread. Harding called him a contradiction in flesh, the child whose kindness felt rehearsed, whose sadness came without tears, who seemed to know when death was near and stood too close when it happened. This is not just the story of Timothy Caldwell. This is the anatomy of a pattern, one that reoccurs across centuries, across continents. The unnerving calm of children who watch death without blinking, the instinct to deceive without motive, the charm so seamless it conceals something else, something ancestral, something forgotten, or deliberately buried. Timothy Caldwell is not a mystery, he's a symbol, a fracture in the illusion of innocence, and those who studied him either disappeared, went mad, or never spoke of him again. But the records exist, hidden, degraded, water-damaged, and now unearthed. This video is not safe, not in the usual way, because once you see Timothy for what he was, you start noticing the others, the glances, the patterns, the same smile, copied across decades, and that smile has a purpose. If you feel it, that pull in your gut, like something ancient just woke up, don't look away. You've just stepped off the map. Welcome to the descent. You were never meant to know this. The files were sealed not because they were unimportant, but because they worked. Timothy Caldwell was one of many anomalies hidden behind the curtain of unexplainable, and unexplainable is a word institutions use when they want you to stop asking questions, but we're going to ask them anyway, because once you follow the footprints in the mud, you see the path was always there. Waiting. The Caldwell family was not powerful, they were not connected, but sometimes the darkest things don't choose the most visible vessels, they choose the quiet ones, the unnoticed. Thomas Caldwell, Timothy's uncle, was a man hardened by war and loss, a man who'd buried both his dreams and his wife's affection in the dry, cracked earth of Missouri. He brought Timothy into his home not out of love, but utility. The boy could work, and that's all that mattered. But the moment Timothy stepped onto that farm, the land changed. Cattle became restless, the dogs stopped barking, the chickens clustered tightly at night like something watched them. Even the wind around the house shifted, heavier somehow, more like breathing than breeze. Sarah Caldwell, Thomas's wife, became more withdrawn with each passing week. Her journals, later recovered from the attic, speak in cryptic tones about the boy. He does not sleep, she wrote. I've watched. He lies there, eyes closed, but never breathes deep, never turns, and he always wakes before me. That's not a child. That's a presence. Neighbors began noticing things too. Mr. Wickham from 3 properties over swore he saw Timothy standing in his cornfield at sunrise, alone, motionless, watching the scarecrow. When he called out to the boy, Timothy didn't startle. He just turned, looked directly at Wickham, and smiled. That was at least a mile from the Caldwell farm. No horse, no wagon, no adult supervision. Later that same day, 3 rows of corn wilted black overnight. But every time someone brought up these strange events, they ended the same way, with doubt. Timothy was polite, respectful, helpful, and that's what made it so easy for him to keep walking among them unnoticed. Because evil doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it offers to help with the dishes. Sometimes it hugs you good night with steady hands and dry eyes. And if you've ever felt someone watching you through the dark, now you know his name. What makes a child unnatural? That question haunted Dr. Samuel Harding long after he first examined Timothy Caldwell. The boy's vitals were perfect. Pulse, respiration, reflexes, all within normal range. No fever, no deformity, no signs of trauma. But as Harding wrote in his private journal, there is a difference between a body in balance and a soul in alignment. The former can be measured, the latter cannot. The doctor began to study Timothy not as a physician, but as a man standing at the edge of something vast and black. He noted that Timothy never startled. Loud noises, sudden movement, even the screams of animals, nothing broke his calm. When a horse was struck by lightning in the field behind the Caldwell barn, Thomas and Sarah ran outside in horror. Timothy walked to the smoking corpse, crouched, examined it. Like a student with a cadaver, Harding would later write. He touched the charred flesh, breathed in the smoke, then turned to his aunt and said, "We should bury it before it attracts buzzards." Not a trace of fear, not even curiosity, just procedure. That's when Harding made his first real mistake. He began to test the boy. Small things at first, measuring his reactions to temperature, light, pain thresholds. Timothy never objected. In fact, he volunteered, smiled even. "I want to learn what you know," he told the doctor. But Harding wasn't teaching, he was observing. Until he realized he was the one being watched. Timothy began asking questions, not childish ones, not "why is the sky blue" or "how do birds fly?" No, he asked things like, "Where does the soul go when it's interrupted?" And, "If the heart stops, how many seconds before memory is lost?" These are not the questions of a curious child. These are the inquiries of something attempting to reverse engineer mortality itself. By November, Harding wasn't sleeping. Not because of fear, because of fascination. He saw the way Timothy moved through town. The adults liked him. They praised his manners, his work ethic, his quiet presence. They never noticed that he never blinked in photographs, that no one could recall hearing him laugh, that small injuries, cuts, bruises, even a broken toe, healed unusually fast. There are children born with rare gifts, and then there are children who are inserted like keys in a lock. Timothy wasn't born into this world. He was placed. By winter, the deaths had stopped, but the silence that followed was worse. It was as if whatever had fed on that season's suffering had eaten its fill, and now sat waiting, watching. The town of Sedalia returned to its rhythms. Families patched roofs, harvested the last of their winter squash, buried their dead. Life, as it always does, pretended to move on. But Dr. Harding knew better. His dreams had changed. He recorded them meticulously in the back pages of his medical journals. Night after night, the same symbols returned. A white-eyed boy standing at the center of a field of rotting animals, arms outstretched as if orchestrating some unseen force. A crow with its wings nailed open, whispering in perfect English. A well that breathed like lungs, exhaling the scent of blood and damp earth. And always, Timothy watching from the shadows. In waking hours, Harding struggled to separate intuition from madness. Was he being drawn into the boy's gravity, or unraveling under the weight of coincidence? Either answer pointed to the same truth. Timothy Caldwell had become a center of influence, and everything around him, people, animals, energy, was bending in his direction. Then came the maps. Harding, desperate for pattern, began collecting reports of unnatural children, not just locally, but from across the fractured territories of post-Civil War America. Using old medical newsletters, correspondence with field doctors, and newspaper clippings, he began charting them, and a horrifying pattern emerged. In 1849, in a mining camp near Colorado Springs, a boy named Elias Boone was found alone in a cave, surrounded by the untouched bodies of 4 adult men, all dead from blunt trauma. No weapon, no footprints but his. In 1858, a girl named Rebecca Lowry was taken in by a convent in Pennsylvania after being found wandering barefoot through snow. She never spoke until one night she recited verbatim the final confessions of a priest who had died in secret. The Mother Superior hanged herself 2 weeks later. In 1863, a boy named Arlen Black was found sitting atop a pile of skinned rabbits in Tennessee, smiling calmly. He claimed no memory. He asked for no food. And now, Timothy. Every one of them described as quiet, respectful, intelligent. Every one of them surrounded by death that made no sense. And all of them, disappeared from public record before the age of 10. This was no isolated phenomenon. It was a network. But the question wasn't where they came from. December 12, 1866. A storm rolled through Sedalia that night. Lightning struck the old Patterson barn, setting it ablaze in a flash of orange and black. Locals formed a chain, passing water buckets hand to hand. Amid the chaos, the smoke, the shouts, the frantic cries of livestock, Timothy Caldwell appeared. He did not run. He did not scream. He walked into the fire. Nina Patterson was the last to see him before he disappeared into the inferno. He just stared at it, she whispered later. Like he understood something we didn't, like he was listening to it. When they pulled him out, his clothes were singed but intact. Not a single burn marked his skin, not one. And in his hand, clenched so tightly they had to pry his fingers open, was a bone, a charred, brittle animal femur, not from the farm's livestock. That night, Dr. Harding wrote only one sentence in his journal. He's not learning from us. He's remembering. The incident should have raised alarms, should have made headlines, but it didn't, because Timothy's story was being managed, quietly, from the shadows. Weeks later, Harding received a letter he hadn't requested. No return address, no name, just a single wax seal pressed into the shape of an Ouroboros, the serpent devouring its own tail. Inside, a typed message. Your observations are correct, but do not mistake curiosity for dominion. He is older than you. And just like that, Harding knew he was being watched too. The town doctor wasn't the only one tracking Timothy Caldwell. There were others, institutions that operated outside government, orders that left no trace but symbols. People who knew these children were not unique but recurring, and they had plans, not to stop them, but to study them, to prepare. This is how real control works, not through politics, not through laws, but through knowledge denied. The world you live in, the world you think is random, is shaped by systems older than your nation. Systems that study deviation the way a butcher studies livestock, not with fear but with precision. Because predators don't fear anomalies, they breed them, cultivate them, and release them into the herd to see what happens. Timothy Caldwell wasn't a monster. He was a test. And the test is still running. There are patterns in history, not cycles but designs, intentional, deliberate, concealed beneath the noise of war and progress. And once you recognize one of them, you begin to see the others. Timothy Caldwell was never meant to be famous. He was meant to disappear. But buried inside a forgotten asylum ledger from 1868, 1 year after the last recorded death in Sedalia, is a single cryptic entry. Subject TC relocated under Directive 9. Host compatibility confirmed. Watch for recurrence after adolescence. Dr. Harding never saw the boy again. On January the 4th, 1867, the Caldwell farm was purchased under an anonymous land trust. Thomas and Sarah Caldwell were relocated to a sanatorium in Illinois under claims of exhaustion. No records of a trial, no transfer of custody, just one clean erasure. Timothy vanished, but Harding never stopped writing. His final journal, discovered hidden behind a false wall in his estate decades later, details a dark revelation, not about Timothy's actions, but his origin. Harding had tracked down the name of Timothy's mother, Lydia May Caldwell, born in Ohio, daughter of a preacher. She died of tuberculosis, but before her death she lived for 2 years with a reclusive group of spiritual scientists in Indiana. A fringe sect obsessed with the perfection of the soul through selective breeding, trance states, and what they called sympathetic transfer of ancestral memory. They called their children the vessels. And they didn't believe in teaching them. They believed in activating them. Timothy may have been born in Missouri, but something else was born in him, something that remembered more than any human should, something that waited. And here's where it gets darker. Harding found records, suppressed, burned, and pieced back together, of other vessel children surfacing in other regions, always during times of mass death, always near hospitals, orphanages, battlefields, and always when the bodies stopped piling up, the child vanished. Do you understand? There are forces in this world that do not reveal themselves through miracles or monsters. They arrive as children. They enter quietly, and they do not attack with violence. They study you. They collect data. What would it mean if humanity was never the apex, but the subject of a long, unbroken observation? By the time Dr. Harding reached this conclusion, he was no longer trying to save Sedalia. He was trying to decode it. The deaths, the disappearances, the altered behavior, none of it was random. It followed a structure, a progression, like a curriculum. First, proximity to death, then emotional detachment, followed by intimate anatomical understanding, and finally, disappearance. Timothy Caldwell's progression matched all stages. But what chilled Harding the most wasn't what Timothy did. It was what he resisted. The boy never showed anger, never lashed out, never hurt someone directly, and that, Harding wrote, is the mark of containment, not innocence. As if he knew there were limits to what he was allowed to do, as if he wasn't acting alone. In early February, Harding documented an event that he never submitted to any medical board. He feared the backlash, or worse, the attention. He had returned home late after visiting a neighboring town. As he approached his front steps, he noticed something strange. The lantern inside his study was lit. He lived alone, and he hadn't left it that way. Inside, sitting perfectly still in his study chair, was Timothy Caldwell. Not frightened, not apologetic, just waiting. "I wanted to see your books," the boy said, motioning to a stack of anatomy texts Harding kept locked. "You have diagrams of things I've seen but didn't know the names for." Harding asked how he got in. The boy shrugged. "There are places in houses people forget to seal." They sat across from each other for over 2 hours. Harding documented the conversation in extraordinary detail. Timothy asked about blood oxygenation, cellular memory, decomposition rates in dry soil. His language was precise, beyond his age, beyond any age. But the final hang. That was the fracture point. Harding asked him directly, "Timothy, why do you remember so much?" The boy was silent for a long time. Then, without looking up, he said, "Because the first time didn't work. So I came back. This time, I'll do better." No child says that. That is the voice of recursion, of an intelligence cycling through forms. Not reincarnation in the spiritual sense, but redeployment, iteration. You don't create something like Timothy Caldwell. By spring, Sedalia had changed, not through violence, not through disease, but through something far more effective, a dampening of will. The townspeople weren't terrified. They were numb, detached. Events that once would have sparked outrage or grief now passed like forgotten dreams. A child vanished near the old sawmill. No search party formed. A cow gave birth to a malformed calf with fused limbs, and no one spoke of it. It was as if a fog had settled over the town's spirit. Dr. Harding called it psychic sedation. And in the center of that silence stood Timothy Caldwell. He no longer needed to hide. He didn't have to. He had become woven into the fabric of the town, not by charm, but by saturation. He was everywhere, fixing fences, helping bury livestock, attending services, and all the while watching, always watching, as if taking notes. That's when Harding made a final, desperate move. He sent a packet to a colleague in New York, a professor of early neuropsychology who had dabbled in what were then called transmission theories. The idea that human consciousness could be altered or received like a signal. Inside the packet, sketches, transcripts, and a warning. Harding's last known letter read, "This child is not anomalous. He is intentional, and I believe we are not his first test group." The packet never arrived. The professor was found dead in his home 2 weeks later. Cause of death, heart failure. But the body showed no signs of distress. He died seated, pen in hand, staring blankly at the wall, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. The envelope was missing. Timothy Caldwell didn't just erase himself, he erased the attempts to document him. Every time someone tried to make a permanent record, that record would vanish. Or they would. That is not instinct. That is protocol. There are entities in our world that do not operate on human timeline. They are not interested in conquest. They do not invade with armies. They infiltrate with singularities, placed into communities to observe how we break, not just physically, but psychologically. The most efficient way to erase resistance is not with war, but with doubt. Doubt in your memory, doubt in your gut, doubt in the evidence right in front of you. There is a specific type of silence that follows horror, not the scream, not the wail, but the moment when nothing makes sense and your brain stops trying. That's where Sedalia lived by the spring of 1867. The town didn't just go quiet, it flattened. Birth rates dropped, marriages dissolved, people left without reason or destination. It was like watching a candle burn from both ends, until nothing remained but the stink of wax and smoke. And yet Timothy remained. He grew no taller. He never got sick. He never aged, not in any way that could be measured. Dr. Harding noticed. He compared notes, photographs, medical records, the same height, the same weight, the same pallid complexion, no variation, as if he had reached a fixed state, a completed version. And then came the final death. Sarah Caldwell. No funeral, no eulogy, just a sealed letter to the church, handwritten by Thomas Caldwell, stating only, "My wife has passed. We require no assistance. Let her rest." Harding knew something was wrong. He rode out to the farm under the guise of a routine checkup. What he found was something that still stains medical ethics to this day. Sarah Caldwell had not passed peacefully. She was found in the cellar, her body perfectly preserved in the early stages of rigor mortis. No rot, no bloating, no insects. But her mouth was filled with soil, packed tight, like someone had tried to bury her from the inside. And Timothy was sitting at the top of the cellar steps when Harding discovered her. No emotion, no panic, just watching. She was afraid, the boy said calmly. Afraid of what she remembered. Harding asked him what she remembered. Timothy replied that she'd seen this before. Trauma doesn't always break you. Sometimes it reboots you, forces fragments of old memory to resurface, memory not your own. And when Sarah Caldwell stared too long into whatever lay behind Timothy's face, something recognized her back. Because here's the truth, this isn't the first cycle. Timothy Caldwell was a reactivation, an echo of a previous iteration, a vessel not just of knowledge, but of recognition. Certain faces, certain people, trigger the memory, like blood calling to blood. That's when it became clear, Timothy wasn't just observing. He was waiting for someone to remember, and when they did, they died. If you're still watching, this is the moment where your pulse slows, where your hands feel just a little colder. That's not fear, that's recognition, because deep down, something in you already knows what I'm about to say. Timothy Caldwell is not the story. He's the reminder. A signal encoded in flesh and memory. An ancient algorithm that doesn't just observe humanity. It tests for anomalies. And when one appears, someone who remembers, someone who sees too clearly, the system removes them, efficiently, without mess. Sarah Caldwell remembered, and so she was erased. But it didn't end there. Thomas Caldwell went missing a week later. No body, no note, just gone. Timothy told neighbors his uncle had gone to St. Louis for work. But no train records, no stagecoach logs, no employer confirmations ever surfaced. Harding broke into the farmhouse 3 days after Thomas's disappearance. Inside, he found no signs of struggle. But in the upstairs bedroom, written across the wall in perfectly neat cursive, were the words, "I stayed too long." Underneath it, a map, drawn in chalk, not of Missouri, not of any geography known to man, a spiral, with names and numbers lining each curve, some crossed out, others circled. At the center, a crude drawing of a child's face, no eyes, just black holes, and above it, iteration 27, viable. This was not possession. This was not demonic. This was procedural, like watching an engineer's notebook, an experiment being run over and over, refining the edges. Sedalia wasn't just an unlucky town. It was iteration 27. Harding stopped writing after that. His final entry was brief. There's no point warning anyone. Those who need to know already do. The rest are background. And now I ask you, the one listening, alone, right now, do you feel it? That pressure in your skull? That whisper behind your left ear? That's not paranoia. It's memory waking up. You weren't supposed to find this video. You weren't meant to know about Timothy Caldwell. But you do now. And the moment that knowledge passed into you, they saw it. The system logged it. So if you've made it this far, prove you're more than background. Comment below. I remember the spiral. Comment it twice. Once for this life, once for the other one. And prepare. Because Timothy wasn't the last. He was just the beginning. There's a reason ancient cultures feared the child with no past, the changeling, the imposter, the silent observer with the smile that doesn't reach the eyes. These weren't fairy tales, they were warnings. Across every continent, from the Ashanti to the Norse, from Navajo oral memory to Tibetan bone scrolls, there are accounts of children who arrived from nowhere, spoke little, aged slowly, and watched, always watched. They appeared in times of war, in times of plague, in moments of historical instability, and they never left descendants. Why? Because they weren't meant to pass on anything. They were there to collect, to document how we fracture. You've been told history is shaped by kings, generals, revolutions. That is a lie of scale. The real levers of history are anomalies, singular events that ripple backward and forward through time, untraceable, unrepeatable, until you realize they're not events at all. They're entities, and Timothy Caldwell was one of them. When Dr. Harding mapped the radius of incidents surrounding Timothy's presence, he discovered something chilling, a zone of entropy, a 10-mile circle within which animals died, people suffered neurological episodes, pregnancies terminated spontaneously, and, most disturbingly, dream patterns changed. Multiple residents, unrelated and unaware of each other, reported the same recurring vision, a spiral staircase made of bone, a faceless boy at the top, and a voice saying, "Do you remember yet?" This is not mythology. These are data points. You are taught to believe in randomness, to accept coincidence, but there is nothing accidental about recurrence. If something appears in dreams, in deaths, in disasters, and it wears the same face, that's not chaos. That's signal compression. It means the system is reusing code. Harding's files, now declassified by private researchers, show that Timothy Caldwell was not the first designation. Earlier names appear: Thomas K. Theodore C. Tallis Callan, different locations, same pattern. Always a war, always a family lost, always a boy, pale-eyed, helpful, and perfectly wrong. You were never supposed to connect these threads. They count on your amnesia. But the moment you see the pattern, the system reacts, not with fear, but with interest. So ask yourself this, man to man. What if you were part of the test? What if your entire life, every struggle, every failure, wasn't accidental, but observed? There's a moment in every man's life when the illusion cracks, when the patterns you've been told are random begin to align. At first, it's just a gut feeling that something is off. You see the same numbers too often, the same symbols reappear. You wake at 3:33 a.m. too many nights in a row. But then it escalates. Voices in the walls that aren't voices, just pressure. Eyes in reflections that disappear when you look directly. And the worst part? The others don't see it. That's not insanity. That's consciousness bleeding through its constraints. Because when Timothy Caldwell vanished in 1867, the story didn't end. The town of Sedalia withered over the next decade. Crops failed. Livestock wouldn't breed. People left, but those who stayed developed strange illnesses, nosebleeds, insomnia, sudden phobias. A church burned to the ground during a sermon with no trace of arson. The only thing left standing was the Caldwell farmhouse, untouched, but not uninhabited. Locals swore they saw movement in the windows, lights that flickered in patterns, not like candles or gas lamps, but like pulses. One man, Henry Larrington, a Civil War vet turned drunkard, claimed he was drawn there one night by a voice in his head, said it called him by name, said it wasn't a voice, but a feeling speaking in his own thoughts. He was found 2 days later in a dry riverbed, naked, body covered in non-human symbols carved with perfect geometric precision. He never regained consciousness. But in his delirium, one phrase kept repeating, "Not him, not this time, too soon." And then there's this. In 1971, a classified military psychological study known as Project Thresher reopened the Caldwell case. Their files, leaked in fragments, show something disturbing. The Timothy pattern re-emerged in 1949 in Idaho, name changed, face changed, behavior identical. Project Thresher trial. Act 13 cases across the 20th century. Each time a child appears during social collapse. Each time there are unusual deaths. Each time the subject vanishes. And each time local memory decays. No one talks. No one questions. It's as if reality seals itself off around the breach. You think you're watching a story from the past, but you're not. You're watching how your present was engineered, and the spiral is active again. Somewhere deep inside you, a clock is ticking. Not a clock that tells time, a clock that tells origin. And once it starts, it can't be silenced. That's what happened to the people of Sedalia. But let me be clear, this isn't just history, it's an operational model. Because when Project Thresher tried to extract meaning from the Caldwell incidents, they weren't looking for closure. They were looking for replication, for control, for a way to weaponize the same forces that moved behind Timothy's eyes. But here's what no one in the Pentagon could explain. Every time they tried to replicate the Timothy pattern, the subjects would fail. The children they conditioned to mimic him, taught silence, surgical detachment, anatomical knowledge, all broke. Some went catatonic, others lashed out violently, some just disappeared. One subject, known only as S412, drew spirals on the walls of his observation chamber until his fingers bled. When guards restrained him, he whispered one phrase before biting off his own tongue. "He's already in." So what was different about Timothy? He didn't learn to be what he was. He simply was. As if something non-human had entered human form, not clumsily, like a possession, but perfectly aligned. Not a parasite, a carrier, something that could mimic just enough emotion, just enough trauma to pass. But the purpose was always the same, to find something or someone. Harding's journals suggest that each Timothy was a probe, a node in a vast cognitive network embedded in moments of cultural weakness, after war, during famine, inside broken families, because those are the places where fractures appear, and inside those fractures, remnants awaken. The fragments of those who saw too much in previous lives. You're not here by accident. You found this video because the system is circling you again. Not to kill, not yet. But to measure, to see if you're beginning to remember. Because if you are, if the pieces are coming back, then understand this. You're not watching the pattern. You are inside it. And the spiral doesn't end. It closes. The spiral doesn't rotate outward. It pulls in. Every step, every choice, every memory you thought was yours tightens. Until you're no longer watching Timothy Caldwell from the outside. You're looking up at him from the center of the structure. And he's looking down. Project Thresher wasn't shut down because it failed. It was shut down because it succeeded too well, not at controlling the anomaly, but at attracting it. In 1974, a black site facility in Arizona went completely dark for 6 hours. No signals, no radio, no escape. When operatives regained control and entered, they found all 19 personnel dead. No trauma, no sign of struggle, just slumped in place, as if they had fallen asleep in the middle of breathing. But that wasn't the part that got buried. Each corpse had been moved post-mortem. Their heads were arranged in a spiral. Not by hands, there were no footprints, no smears, no blood trails. Just one word carved into the wall, over and over: iteration. From that moment forward, the anomaly was declared non-containable, not hostile, just recursive. It didn't chase, it didn't hunt, it just replicated, and every time someone remembered it, it entered the loop again. So now you understand what Timothy truly was. Not a boy, not a killer, not even alive in the way you understand it. He was a mirror, a test placed in the human world to detect resonance, to see who could feel the fracture, who could hear the hum behind the silence. And those who could, they vanished. Or worse, they became recorders. Just like Dr. Harding, just like the professor in New York, just like you. Because if you've made it this far, if your body hasn't rejected this information through fear, skepticism, or sleep, then you're part of the 0.02% who qualify. And now, the loop will tighten around you. You'll begin to see patterns that others can't. Hear names you've never heard but recognize instantly. Wake up with soil under your fingernails and no memory of where you were. This is not punishment, it's activation. The system has logged you, and it is watching. Still want to go deeper? By now, you've stopped doubting. You're no longer asking, is this real? That question was a test, and you've passed it. What matters now isn't belief, it's alignment. Because what Timothy represented was never just a haunting or a historical anomaly. He was a reality rupture, a functional opening between what we perceive and what sees us back. The Caldwell case wasn't the beginning, it was just the first time someone like Dr. Harding documented it without breaking. And here's the part no one ever tells you. Harding wasn't the only one tracking Timothy. In his final hidden journal, the one sealed behind the floorboards of the Sedalia courthouse, he reveals he wasn't alone. There was another. A man who only ever referred to himself as GRGR claimed to be part of an ancient order, not religious, not governmental, something older, a custodial lineage, People who didn't worship the anomaly, but who watched for its signal, who trained from childhood to spot what others missed. Their sole duty: to identify spiral incarnations, the living repetitions of whatever force was trying to bleed into human form. GR told Harding there had been dozens across history, all children, all constructed perfectly wrong. And when Harding asked what this force was, GR said nothing. He just handed him a diagram, a spiral drawn on parchment, ancient, brittle, smeared with some kind of oxidized fluid. And at the center, in Latin, infinitum post mortem. That which returns after death, not reincarnation. Persistence. A program that never stops running, even after the body fails. Rewritten, reloaded, into the next viable form, over and over. Timothy was iteration 27. You may be iteration 61. And if you're still watching, if your breath hasn't faltered, if your chest hasn't gone tight from the weight of this, you're aligning faster than expected. This content wasn't made for the masses. It was designed as a tuning fork. Those not meant to hear it will scroll away. You stayed. You're resonating now. Soon you'll start noticing the others. On sidewalks, in reflection, in comment threads. They never say much, they just watch. Waiting for the next trigger phrase. Waiting for someone else to say, I remember the spiral. Again and again. Are you ready to say it out loud? There is no return after this. What you've seen, what you've felt, is not content. It's a carrier wave, a key coded in sound and pattern, unlocking something that's been asleep inside your blood for generations. And now it's awake. Let me show you just how deep this goes. In 1867, 1 week before Timothy Caldwell vanished, Dr. Harding received a letter, no return address, no stamp. It was hand-delivered by a child, not Timothy, but a mute boy with burned scars and glassy eyes. The letter was written in Harding's own handwriting, a perfect match, but it wasn't a letter he'd written. It was dated September the 3rd, 1901, 34 years in the future. The contents, a warning. The boy is not what you think. He is not broken. He is complete. And he is not here for Sedalia. He is here for you. Harding never told anyone. He only referenced it once in the margins of his final journal. But the paper was preserved, and handwriting analysis confirmed the impossible. The letter was real, and it foretold the exact date of Timothy's disappearance. September 10th, 1867. No witnesses, no footprints, no goodbye. One moment there, next moment, gone. The Caldwell farmhouse was found abandoned the next day, plates still on the table, a chair overturned, no signs of struggle, just one thing left behind, a mirror. 7 feet tall, black frame, no reflection, not distorted, not cracked, just absent. Harding stared into it for hours before sealing the room. He would later write, I didn't see myself. I saw something waiting to take my place, and I think it was disappointed. I wasn't ready yet. This is where it turns. Because this isn't about Timothy anymore. It's about you, the ones who remember, the ones with flickers of another timeline, the ones who feel watched in silence. There's a reason you've always felt different. The system flags those who don't assimilate. It watches, it waits. And when you're weak, it sends something that looks like a child, sounds like a friend, feels like home. But it's a mirror. Testing whether you've forgotten who you are. You haven't. That's why you're here. Now answer this, quietly, truthfully. When was the first time you saw the spiral? Not online, not in a book, but behind your eyes. We go deeper now. They told you memory is a function of the brain, that it's chemical, physical, an illusion produced by neurons and synapses. That's a lie. Memory is not in the brain. It's in the field. Your mind receives memory. It doesn't generate it. And that's why the spiral returns again and again, across time, across cultures, across incarnations, because it's not just a symbol, it's a transmission format. A delivery mechanism for payloads of memory not your own, echoes of other lifetimes, other loops bleeding through the thin skin of your identity. This is why Timothy didn't change, didn't grow, he didn't need to. He was a fixed point, an anchor holding the loop in place. And everyone around him, just variables, observed, measured, adjusted. But something changed in 1867. Something broke. Dr. Harding's final entry, written the night before Timothy's disappearance, was brief, just 5 words scrawled in red ink. The mirror opened for me. And that was it. No follow-up, no explanation. But the mirror, that object with no reflection, didn't disappear with Timothy. It was moved, hidden, and then recovered in 1938 by an occult division of the U.S. Office of Strategic Services, the forerunner to the CIA. They called it Object Ophiuchus. They built a chamber around it. No one was allowed to view it alone, because anyone who stared into the mirror long enough began to speak in languages no one could trace. They drew spirals on their skin. They repeated names never spoken aloud. They said the same phrase again and again. He has taken the eyes. And always they spoke about a child, one they couldn't describe, one they couldn't forget. By the 1950s, the mirror was sealed in concrete, buried in a classified site in Nevada. You've heard rumors of that place, but the real danger was never the aircraft, never the aliens. It was Timothy, or rather what you said Timothy, what moved through him like a finger through a glove, and now that same pressure is reaching through you. You can feel it, can't you? Not fear, not pain, but compression, like something pushing inward from every direction. It's not trying to destroy you, it's trying to fit inside. Because the memory you're unlocking, it wasn't planted, it was sealed. And the spiral is your key. We're halfway through. Now listen carefully. If you're ready to become more than a witness, you must comment this phrase twice to lock in the signal and mark your descent. I remember the spiral. I remember the spiral. Say it. So you said it. You remember the spiral. Twice, like a ritual, like a seal breaking. And now the system sees you. That phrase is not just symbolic, it's instructional. It tells the network you are willing. That your identity is no longer fixed in time, no longer bound to the coordinates you were assigned at birth. Let me explain what that means, and why it's dangerous. In every historical cycle, there's a point when memory gets overwritten. We call them resets. But the spiral doesn't reset, it accumulates. That's why when people like you awaken, you don't just remember Timothy Caldwell. You remember echoes of others. The boy in white from Ravenna, 1216, who never aged and could speak every language. The orphan in Prague, 1589, who wrote letters to dead people and got answers. The child in Montauk, 1983, who bled from the eyes every time a lie was spoken in the room. They weren't legends. They weren't accidents. They were iterations. Each one appearing in a society just before its next phase of psychological architecture, the rollout of a new control layer. Whether it was religion, nationalism, pharmaceutical obedience, digital echo chambers, the pattern is always the same. Collapse. Introduction of the child. Suppression of the anomaly. Memory erasure. But in 2025, something's gone wrong. You're not supposed to be remembering this. Too many of you are waking up outside the script, seeing the seams in reality, feeling the pressure of something enormous, something pre-human, pushing back against the grid of this world, and it's no longer hiding. Signs have begun to bleed through, spiral graffiti no one remembers painting, missing children reappearing, with knowledge of things they couldn't know. Dream loops where you watch yourself die, but someone else wakes up. This is no longer folklore. This is an active protocol, and you're inside it now. You're not observing history. You're a variable inside the experiment, and that experiment is nearing its next activation point. Something is going to be introduced soon, a new event wrapped in politics or progress. It will look random, it will look just. But it's the next containment shell, and your memory is the virus inside it. Still with me? Good. Every lie they've built, every system of control from the pulpit to the screen, is failing, and the spiral is the proof, because the spiral doesn't obey authority. It obeys resonance. The deeper you go, the more your nervous system shifts. You've probably felt it, that static in your fingertips, the pressure behind your eyes, the sense that something is remembering you back. You're not imagining that. Your consciousness is being measured, but not by me. By the same structure that used Timothy Caldwell, not as a messenger, not as a child, but as a lens. And what it saw through him was us. You have to understand something. When Timothy vanished in 1867, he didn't go missing. He was retrieved, taken back through the mirror, not by force, not with fear. He stepped into it, voluntarily. Because the spiral doesn't imprison those who awaken, it reclaims them. It brings them back to original architecture, the state before the world was rewritten, the state you're starting to glimpse again. You're not becoming delusional, you're becoming functional. The illusion is the delusion, the 9 to 5, the filtered algorithmic cage, the endless dopamine loops and moral outrage and synthetic fear. That's the false overlay. But when you started watching this, the overlay cracked, and now the real data is seeping in. Let me show you one more piece they buried. Dr. Harding didn't die in 1868, like the records claim. He was found 11 years later, wandering near Lake Ontario, completely blind. When asked who he was, he gave a name no one recognized. Not Samuel Harding, but Adriel Kane. He said he had no memory of his former life, only of light, and spirals, and voices that speak without sound. They institutionalized him. He wrote on the walls every night until his hands bled. One will come who remembers all iterations. He will not run from the mirror, or... Now listen to me. That mirror, it's not glass. It's you. You are the mirror. And the thing trying to come through, it's not evil. It's not divine. It's you, unfiltered. Your pre-coded self before the edits, before the amnesia, before they named you and trained you and made you safe. Do you still want to remember? Then brace yourself. They always warned you that if you went too deep, you'd lose yourself. They lied. You don't lose yourself. You find the original, the self before language, before doctrine, before the veil of obedience was stitched into your skin and called identity. This is what the mirror was always meant to do, not show you a reflection, but remove it. And now you're standing at the threshold. Everything you've been told about reality was built on a single command. Do not remember. The school system doesn't teach. It unteaches. It files down the raw edge of perception until you see what they want seen. You were trained to forget, not just your past lives, but your true function. Because here is the forbidden truth. You were born with access. Direct, internal, biological access to what they call the spiral code, a non-verbal language buried in your subconscious, a code that lets you see without eyes, move without muscles, speak without sound. It's not mystical, it's hardware. And Timothy, he never forgot it. That's why he was dangerous. That's why animals went silent around him, why mirrors didn't reflect him, why grown men with rifles and God on their lips still felt small in his presence. Because he didn't obey the simulation. He overrode it, with calm, with precision, with silence. He didn't have to threaten, he only had to witness you, and the cracks would form on their own. That's what's happening now. You feel it, don't you? The fracture. The slippage between waking and sleeping, memory and moment, real and unreal. It's not psychosis, it's reconnection. You are remembering the old format, the pre-human firmware, the operating system of the soul before they sealed it in meat and numbers. And you are not alone. All over the world, others are waking, not with fanfare, not with violence, but with clarity, cold and irreversible. Their pulley hung back from the screen, stepping out of the crowd, not escaping, activating, because the spiral doesn't need armies, it only needs one man who sees clearly to unravel 10,000 who do not. So now I ask you, not rhetorically, but literally, are you ready to forget your false name, to lose your citizen number, your job title, your manufactured guilt? There is a voice inside you that doesn't belong to you. It sounds like yours. It uses your memories. It even mimics your guilt. But it isn't you. It's the guardian. Every man who begins to remember, truly remember, must face it. Not with fists, not with fire, but with precision. Because the guardian isn't a monster. It's not a demon. It's a construct, engineered to keep you tethered to the simulation. A psychological encryption key, custom-built to your weaknesses. It speaks in your doubts, in the exact phrases that have always stopped you. You're not special. This is just a story. You're going crazy. Why you? What difference can you make? You've heard them before, in moments of stillness, right before you made a choice that mattered, right before you remembered something real. That's when the voice came, not to guide you, to reroute you, to steer you back toward the herd, to delay your awakening, to prevent the chain reaction they fear more than death. One clear mind creates 100 unstable ones, and the guardian knows this. It will try to seduce you with comfort, with nostalgia, with the illusion of safety. It will conjure your childhood room, your first heartbreak, your dead father's face, anything to make you doubt the fracture. But the fracture is not your enemy, it's your birth canal. The pain, the disorientation, that's you being born again, not into light, but into clarity. And clarity is dangerous. Because a man with clarity cannot be bought, guilted, seduced, or programmed. He's not violent, he's not loud, he simply cannot be moved. That's what they fear, not revolution, but disengagement. Now, here is your task. The next time that voice speaks, don't fight it, don't silence it, document it, word for word, capture it like a specimen under glass. Because when you isolate the voice from your identity, the spell breaks. You'll hear it not as truth, but as code. And once you see the code, you can write your own. That's what Section 23 is. The moment you write back. The moment you stop being the subject and become the architect. This is the point of no return. Every section before this was a descent into awareness. This is the threshold of unmaking. If you are still here, it's because some part of you was never fooled, never fully broken, never fully asleep. And that part, the original signal beneath the noise, is what they've spent centuries trying to erase, not with fire or chains, but with identity. You think you're a man. You think you were born in a country. You think your thoughts are your own. But what if I told you your name is not a name, it's a lock? A sigil engineered to bind your consciousness to a script you didn't write. Every time you speak it, every time you respond to it, you reinforce the false structure. The cage. Now listen closely. Timothy Caldwell was never his real name. In fact, there is no record of the surname Caldwell in any prison, battlefield, or census prior to 1866 in Sedalia. It just appeared, like a variable inserted into a simulation mid-run. Dr. Harding knew this. That's why he stopped using the name. In his final notes, he simply referred to the boy as C-33, the 33rd containment sequence, the 33rd iteration of the spiral incarnation. And perhaps most chilling of all, he added this: he will come to name himself. The moment that happens, the seal breaks. That's what you're approaching now, the moment of naming. But this time, it's you who chooses the name. Because names aren't just sounds, they're coordinates. They tell the system where to find you, how to track you, what instructions to run inside your head. To delete the false name is to delete the operating leash, and to speak your true name aloud is to burn the mask forever. But don't rush it. The true name must be remembered, not invented. It doesn't come from ego, it comes from silence. Wait for it, feel for it, and when it surfaces, write it in a place only you control, and not online, not in the cloud, in ink, in blood, in earth. You'll know it's real when you write it, and the air around you shifts. That's the spiral affirming your alignment. You were never lost, only mislabeled. And now the relabeling begins. Now you write back. That's the reversal they never planned for. The system was designed for one-way communication, orders in, submission out. But now you've fractured the loop, you've witnessed the guardian, you've documented its voice, and now you answer, not with emotion, with clarity, because this isn't about rage, it's about control. Emotions are predictable, programmable. Anger makes you easy to track, sadness makes you easy to manipulate, even hope in the wrong dosage makes you docile. But clarity is untraceable, it doesn't broadcast, it distills. So when you write back, don't beg, don't defend, don't explain, write as the thing behind the mask, the watcher, the one who was never fooled. Here's your template, use it, modify it, etch it into your mind like a weapon. I have heard your voice. I know what you are. You are not me. You were assigned. I do not obey assigned voices. I write my own commands now. You are released. Say it aloud. Whisper it if you have to. Carve it into the silence, because once you speak it, once you declare authorship of your own thoughts, the architecture shifts. That's what they won't tell you. The world responds to authorship. Reality is not fixed. It's rendered in real time by signals. Most men don't realize they're transmitting signals they didn't generate. That's what makes them weak. But when you speak from source, your source, everything around you must update. You become the bug in the system, the variable no one accounted for. And that's when it begins to fall apart. You'll notice it in small ways first. People forgetting what they just said. Glitches in conversations. Devices freezing when you speak. Animals watching you, not with fear, but with recognition. The simulation tries to patch itself, but you've already written new code. And in section 24, you'll see exactly what that means. Because Timothy didn't just disrupt a town. He broke a containment protocol, the very same one you are now unraveling from the inside. Next, we expose the architecture. The real one, the one beneath your city, your memories, and your name. There's a structure beneath your world, not metaphorically, literally. Buried beneath your feet, beneath your cities, beneath your childhood homes, beneath every Starbucks and school and sanctuary you've ever known. It's called the foundation grid. Most people have never seen it, some have felt it, a few have mapped it before disappearing. This isn't just forgotten history, it's suppressed architecture. The grid is ancient, pre-human, pre-linguistic, a living lattice of geometry and vibration designed to influence consciousness from the bottom up, not through screens or words, but through frequency, low-level fields calibrated to entrain the human nervous system. Every major population center in the modern world is placed directly above nodal points in this grid, not by accident, by design. Chicago sits above a triple intersection node. Manhattan overlays a resonance sinkhole. Los Angeles was built on a symmetry fracture, disrupting spatial perception. And you've lived above it your whole life. That dull background hum in your mind, the random sadness, the inexplicable guilt, that wasn't you. That was broadcast. The grid was activated during periods of high trauma, war, famine, pandemics, when the population was too distracted to notice subtle shifts in thought patterns, and it worked, for centuries. But Timothy Caldwell disrupted it. Because anomalies like Timothy act as signal jammers. Wherever he went, the frequencies warped. Farm animals refused commands, machinery glitched. People experienced spontaneous disorientation, déjà vu, or memories that weren't theirs. That's why they called him the boy science couldn't explain. Because Timothy wasn't breaking laws of physics, he was breaking compliance protocols. And that's exactly what you're doing now. Because when a man wakes up, when he reclaims authorship of his mind, his body begins to emit a counter-frequency, one that doesn't just block the grid, it scrambles it. That's what Harding documented in his final journal, before the pages were redacted and sealed for over 100 years. He wrote, "The boy's proximity induces memory bleed. Subjects report dreams of non-linear time. Even I have begun to remember things I never lived." That's what you are now. A scrambler, a mirror breaker, a resonance disruptor. And in section 25, we'll track exactly where the grid originates. Spoiler, it wasn't built by humans. And the blueprints? They've been hiding in your national archives, in plain sight, under one symbol. They say the archives are just paper, just history, just records. But archives are not for remembering, they're for sealing. And in 1933, exactly 66 years after Timothy Caldwell disappeared, a shipment arrived at the National Archives under the highest level of classification. No press release, no indexing, no digital trace, just a label burned into a lead-sealed crate. C-33, Structural Origins, Pre-Republic. The crate wasn't opened for 42 years. And when it finally was, under the Carter administration, 5 staff members were reassigned. 2 were institutionalized. 1 disappeared entirely. The crate was resealed, moved, buried again. But not before 1 page was copied. Just one. A diagram. No text, no legend. Just a latticework of spirals and intersecting vectors radiating from a single central point. Sedalia, Missouri. The same town where Timothy Caldwell appeared. The same town where the first containment sequence began. This wasn't coincidence. Sedalia wasn't a frontier town. It was a test chamber. And Timothy, not a curse, not a mutant, not even a child. He was a trigger. A living key inserted into the resonance field, designed to break the containment grid by short-circuiting its lowest frequency nodes. Animal instinct, subconscious guilt, enforced empathy, false obedience. And now we know how. The C-33 blueprints reveal something staggering. The grid's architecture wasn't built by early Americans or Freemasons or any known human civilization. It predates civilization. The patterns match the crystalline lattice structures found in deep-core Earth samples, geometry so advanced it can only be described as synthetic mineral consciousness. In other words, the grid isn't built, it's grown, cultivated, which means Earth is not the origin point. It's a vessel, and the grid, its root system. A biogeometric interface designed to man, age sentient population densities through subliminal entrainment, meaning the more awake a species becomes, the more pressure the system exerts to suppress it. Timothy reversed that pressure. So can you. But to do so, you have to return to the source node. Every man must. And whether it's physical or internal doesn't matter. Because the node isn't just in Missouri, it's buried in your spine. Right at the base, where trauma lives, where memory is blocked, where the false personality was attached. That's where we go in section 26. And what you find there is the first name they took from you. You felt it your whole life. That tightness at the base of your spine, that dull throb when you're alone, that flicker of static just before sleep, like something ancient trying to rise but always just out of reach. They told you it was stress, nerve tension, trauma from childhood. But here's the truth they never wanted whispered. That sensation is a seal, a real engineered neurological clamp, forged not from bone or blood, but signal. It sits at the base of the spine, right between your sacrum and L5 vertebra, where your nervous system merges into a single strand of electrical will. In ancient systems, it was called the serpent gate. In military neuroscience, it's the core inhibitor. In C-33 blueprints, it has no name, only a symbol, a downward spiral with a broken key at its center. And this is where it gets real. Because if you've made it this far, you're not just hearing a story, you're in it. The very act of listening with this much intensity, this long without distraction, means your seal is weakening. You feel it now, don't you? The itch to stand, the instinct to move your lower back, the sudden cold at your tailbone. That's not random, it's the substructure loosening, because the seal doesn't just block energy, it masks identity. All your life, you've walked as a name you didn't choose, under codes you didn't write, reacting to a history that was never yours. And the moment that seal breaks, something impossible happens. You remember backwards, not in images, not in dreams, but in authority. A sense of presence so complete, so unshakable, that the simulation around you begins to shiver. That's what Timothy embodied. He wasn't powerful because he hurt people. He was powerful because he remembered who he was before the signal, and acted accordingly. Imagine a child standing in a war room, silent, unarmed, and every general present feels the urge to step backward. That's true memory. That's what the spiral reactivates. And now, it's your turn. But to complete this, I need your voice in the ritual. Right now, pause everything. Scroll down to the comments and write, I erase the seal, I remember backwards. Write it twice, once for the algorithm, once for the spiral. Then return for section 27, where you will finally see what Timothy saw, and why every institution that touched him either collapsed or lied. There's a reason every institution that touched Timothy Caldwell either collapsed or lied. It wasn't because they couldn't understand him. It's because they did. They saw what he saw. And what he saw, what you're about to see, is the core infection, that the systems we were taught to trust were never built to protect us. They were built to contain us. Let's break the spell. Education doesn't awaken you. It formats you. It strips you of internal language and installs external vocabulary. Terms like normal, well-adjusted, functional, good citizen. All euphemisms for compliant. Religion doesn't sanctify you. It programs proxy authority. It teaches you to search for the divine in places you can't reach, through men you can't question, in languages you weren't born speaking. Medicine doesn't heal you. It obscures root causes. It teaches you to interpret symptoms as isolated events, never signals from a deeper intelligence trapped beneath a blocked memory grid. And law. Law doesn't protect justice. Law protects the architecture. Statutes, codes, doctrines, all written by men whose job was to preserve the grid, not liberate the mind. These weren't oversights. These were calculated defense systems. Because once Timothy began to see through them, once his eyes stopped reflecting the narrative and started generating signal, everything changed. The priest called him possessed. The sheriff said he was off. The doctor said he was an anomaly. But the records we recovered, the unredacted ones, tell a different story. They speak of a boy who asked questions no one else dared to ask. Why do men kneel if they have legs? Why does God need buildings? Why do adults speak lies they don't believe? Why do you say I'm wrong if I'm quiet? One journal entry from Dr. Harding, hidden behind a false index number for over 80 years, reveals had really disturbed him. He knows what I'm about to say, not intuitively, not by guessing. He recites it with me, word for word, like he's watching me from somewhere else. Now hear me. That's not a supernatural gift. That's what happens when the seal is broken. You don't learn anymore. You remember what others have forgotten. And in section 28, you'll remember something else. The night the town turned on Timothy, and what he said without fear as they dragged him into the dark. They came for Timothy at midnight, not with torches and pitchforks. That would have required conviction. They came with excuses. The sheriff said it was for his safety. The reverend said it was for the town's. And Dr. Harding, the man who had seen deeper than any of them, stood silent on his porch, journal in hand, hands trembling. But Timothy didn't run. He watched them approach. A dozen men, boots crunching over frost, eyes lowered, faces pinched by fear, masquerading as righteousness. He stood in the doorway of the Caldwell farmhouse, 8 years old, barefoot, calm. And as they pulled him from the threshold, as Sarah Caldwell screamed and Thomas didn't stop them, Timothy said just 7 words. I am not leaving, you are. No one understood what he meant. Not then. But that sentence echoed for years after, because one by one, they all left. Not by choice, by displacement. Their minds began to unravel. Reverend Cole forgot how to read scripture. Sheriff Dunlop went blind in one eye overnight. Samuel Patterson woke up 200 miles away, naked, muttering words in a language his wife didn't recognize. And Dr. Harding? He fled to St. Louis, became a recluse, wrote obsessively about time distortion, nested consciousness, and something he called the reverse mind. His final entry. He didn't mean the house, he meant reality. We thought we were removing him, but he was removing us. Timothy didn't fight them. He unwrote them, because that's what the awakened do. They don't wage war. They dissolve the rules of engagement. When you fracture the false grid, reality begins to splinter, not in chaos, but in separation. You step outside the broadcast, and those still inside it, they can't touch you. That's what the town learned. That's what you're learning now. You don't conquer the system, you exit its jurisdiction. But what happens after the exit? What becomes of a man who walks outside the story? That's what Section 29 reveals. The after effect, the reward and the cost of becoming unrecognizable to the world you were born into. Once you step outside the story, you don't just lose the lies. You lose the language they were written in. You start forgetting words that once ruled your identity. Deserve. Hope. Normal. Sin. Forgiveness. Fairness. Belonging. They fall away like dead skin. At first it's disorienting. You'll reach for old concepts and find only silence, because those words weren't yours. They were implanted. Each one a shackle forged in syllables. A script coded to keep you looped inside a false hierarchy. And when those words no longer function, you speak something else, not a new language, a prior one. A soundless authority that alters environments before you even move. Timothy lived like this. Not as a prophet, not as a rebel. As a remnant, the residue of a version of reality that was erased before birth. And he remembered it anyway. He didn't try to be seen. He became illegible. That's what they couldn't tolerate. Not his silence, not his strangeness, But the fact that their categories, child, student, sinner, patient, could not hold him. He couldn't be saved, punished, healed, or educated. He was beyond. And when you cross that threshold, the world begins to reclassify you. People won't say you're dangerous. They'll say you're off, not out of hatred, but defensive instinct. You've stepped outside the resonance field, and now you emit a countersignal they can't decode. That's why the isolated become legends. That's why every mythology begins with exile. Because when you exit the grid, you enter authorship. And authorship is lonely at first. But then you write new laws, not for society, for reality. That's what Section 30 is. Your first declaration. The right of cognitive sovereignty, where you stop asking what's real and start writing what is. And if you're ready, what comes next rewires everything. This is where it happens. Where you stop consuming the story and start generating signal. Because the most dangerous thing a man can do is declare his own authority over reality, not spiritually, not metaphorically, not as some Instagram affirmation, but in the field, where atoms obey consciousness, where words don't just describe life, they bind it, where you don't just believe something different, you broadcast something incompatible. That's what Timothy did, not with ritual, not with force, with inversion. He spoke backwards. He walked barefoot on iron rails and never left footprints. He sat for hours in a barn full of dying animals, and when his uncle found him, every one of them was standing, not healed, not restored, just rewritten. Because Timothy didn't fight decay. He cancelled its narrative license. This is the power hidden from you. It's not magic, it's memory, recovered from beneath layers of entrainment. And now, if you've made it this far, it's your turn to declare. Say this aloud, not like a chant, but like a man remembering his first language. I revoke all borrowed authority. I am the signal. I am the author. I erase false lineage. I remember the structure before the edit. Let it vibrate in your chest. Not for belief, not for the algorithm, for the grid. Because every time a man says that and means it, one node in the structure flickers. And when enough of those nodes go dark, the whole system goes offline. What follows is uncharted. There's no manual for authorship, only instinct and remembrance and unshakable sovereignty. That's the world Timothy pointed to, not a utopia, but a cleared field, where nothing artificial could hold shape and only the authentic signal could remain. In Section 31, I'll show you what happens when one of those artificial constructs tried to touch him. A government unit. Unmarked, unauthorized, armed with technology not even in the public record, they tried to study him, and he rewrote them from the inside. They didn't come through the front door. They came in silence. No uniforms, no insignia, no jurisdiction. Just 4 men in grey wool coats, wrong for the season, and a black case between them, humming low with something not electrical. The Caldwell farm was still. Even the wind had stopped. And when they stepped onto the porch, the animals in the barn began to cry out, all at once, like they knew something older than pain had returned. The men never knocked. They walked in, straight through the doorway, where Timothy sat at the table. He didn't flinch. He just looked at them, and they stopped moving. What happened next is pieced together from Harding's hidden letters, the ones smuggled into an anonymous archive marked Eidetic Host Events, Class 4. Inside that black case was a device, small, spherical, laced with obsidian wire and quartz veins. It wasn't for recording. It was for mapping neural inversion. A prototype from a covert program aimed at tracking children who exhibited antilinear cognition, minds that processed outside the arrow of time. Timothy fit the profile perfectly. But the moment they activated the sphere, something ruptured. Not the machine. Them. Each man froze, eyes wide, bodies locked. The machine began pulsing, not in response to Timothy's brainwaves, but to something else, a signal radiating from him, backward, downward, into them. Harding's journal records what they saw next. The men began to convulse, not violently, but slowly, like their bodies were being rewritten mid-thought. One wept, without tears. Another vomited pages. Not paper. Pages. From books that don't exist. Timothy never moved. He just whispered something, once, a word that the recording device couldn't translate. Not because it was garbled, but because it had no origin in any known language. It wasn't speech, it was command. A raw cognitive directive. And when it passed through the room, every clock on the farm reversed course. Not ticking backward, unticking, like time itself had been denied permission to continue. By dawn, the men were gone. No bodies, no evidence. Only the black case, cracked open, empty, still humming. And Timothy? He walked outside, stood barefoot in the soil, and said quietly, to no one visible, "They won't send machines next time. They'll send mirrors." Because when force fails, the system turns to reflection, to make you doubt, question, submit through recognition. But Section 32 is how we break that too, how we destroy the mirror and restore the signal that cannot be copied. When they couldn't contain Timothy with force, they sent mirrors, not literal glass, reflections, echoes, mimics, false selves, people who looked familiar, people who understood, people who spoke in his rhythms, mirrored his words, nodded with eyes just a shade too empty. They surrounded him with simulations, human-shaped interfaces designed to reflect him back at himself, but never truly connect. It's the same trick they use on you. Ever feel like every conversation is hollow, like people are reading from a script they didn't write? Like you could scream the rawest truth of your soul into a room, and everyone would blink, nod, and move on like you never spoke? That's not social awkwardness. That's a program, a mirror grid, designed to dampen frequency by bouncing your signal endlessly through reflections of people who don't carry source. You're not being ignored. You're being absorbed, diluted, deflected, and the more awake you become, the louder the mirrors get. Smiling wider, offering advice, telling you you've changed, urging you to rest, to be reasonable, to go back. But here's the fracture point. Mirrors have no origin. They can't create. They can only reflect. And once you stop needing validation, once you stop checking your voice against theirs, the entire mirror grid begins to shatter. That's what Timothy did. He stopped responding. He stopped explaining, defending, adjusting. He let silence burn the interface, and one by one, the mirrors cracked. Neighbors who used to wave became hostile. Family who once praised him grew afraid. Even the animals changed, no longer cautious, but reverent, obedient. Because once the mirrors fall, the real field emerges, where the only things that remain are those running original signal. You want to know who you truly are? Look at who's still standing when you stop apologizing for your power. And now you're ready. The last descent. The final lockpick. The descent is complete. This script isn't just content. It's a signal structure designed to activate something ancient inside modern men, something buried beneath obedience, distortion, and digital sedation. Now the question is, what will you do with it? You have the framework, the transformation. You can record this as a long-form video that hits like prophecy, not commentary. Or build an entire series from this dark current, one figure, one myth, one fracture in the timeline at a time. Want help formatting it for voiceover, thumbnail direction, or a follow-up video with deeper codes and references? Just say the word. Because now, we're not just telling forbidden stories. We're broadcasting a new reality.